Hey guys, so this video is walking you guys through your last essay assignment, which is a literary analysis essay. So we're moving in a totally different direction than the first two essays. So I want to make that very clear. You're not writing about the same thing you've been writing about. You're writing about a short story that we are reading called In a Grove. So please make sure that you are clear on that. We are no longer writing about the same topics as you were in your first and second essay. We're switching gears now and focusing entirely on how to analyze a piece of literature, which in this case is the short story In a Grove. So for this assignment, you're basically taking some of the skills that you learned about writing arguments and applying that to analyzing a piece of literature. So you're going to create an argument about either a character, a theme, or what we call an approach within the story In a Grove. So when you're discussing a character, a theme, or approach, there's a couple things you can think about. And like I said, you're going to choose one of these three things. You're not doing all of them, just one. And we're going to talk about these different things. But if you're choosing to discuss a character, you're looking at the character's behaviors and their motivations and thinking about things like, what are the characteristics that you know about that character? And how do you know that? Does the author tell you? Do you gather that information from what the character thinks or says, or through dialogue about the character? How are they described? How do any of these characteristics conflict? So, for example, if I told you about a character and I, as the author, am describing them, and I said they had a long, jagged scar across their face, they wore all black, a black hood, and carried a scabbard at their side, you would look at that character and probably know that that's probably the antagonist. That's probably the bad guy, right? I might guess that they are, a warrior or someone who's seen battle or violence because of the scar on their face and the fact that they carry a knife, these kinds of things. So how do you know these things about these characters? Secondarily, you want to think about, are they trustworthy? And in this story, this is a really interesting look at whether or not characters are trustworthy. And how do we know this? Why might they be telling the truth, or why might they be lying? What do they gain or lose by lying or telling the truth? And then what's the background of the characters? So what are the things that we know about that character's history, and how do we know that? What are the characteristics that are telling us that? Is it the way that they dress? Is it the way that they talk about people or the world? Is it something that's unsaid? So something about their history that they don't want to talk about. This doesn't have to be just the main characters. This can also be the side characters as well. If you're going to talk about a theme, on the other hand, you're going to talk about the overall point or message of the story. So what is the author trying to tell you is the key theme, the key message of their story? What evidence from the story tells you that that's the theme? So if you're looking at, say, Harry Potter, one of the themes might be bravery, being brave, even when you're scared, and why that's important. How do you know that? Well, because I know Harry undergoes a lot of different trials, right? And he has to be brave in every one of them, even though I know he's scared because of what he says or thinks. In something like, I don't know, The Tortoise and the Hare, the theme or the message, of course, is that slow and steady wins the race. And I know that because of the characters. I know that the tortoise wins because he's not, as impulsive as the rabbit. On the other hand, an approach thinks about how you read a story. So do we read it with a specific lens, a specific set of beliefs, or a specific understanding? There's a lecture that goes into this, but there's things like new criticism and things like, a gendered look, gender dynamics. How do we look at something with a historical view? So if I'm looking at a story like a story that has a historical element, so maybe that's something like something set in feudal Japan, like this story. You might look at the history of social classes. You might look at the history of the samurai. You might look at how those different elements as a history help shape meaning. If you are looking at it from, say, like a gender perspective, you might look at how the different social structures are created around the different genders. What are the different expectations? How are they supposed to interact? What does that mean for how these genders interact with one another or with each other? What does it say about male or female bonds? Those kinds of things. If you look at it from like a more new criticism approach, you might look at different literary elements, things like symbolism or metaphors, and think about how that helps shape a particular meaning. So like I said, you're going to choose one of these three things, whether you're analyzing a character, looking at one of the themes, or looking at an approach. And you're going to write a short argumentative essay about that relative to the story in a grove. So your essay has to be 3 to 4 pages in length and is due on Sunday, May 10th by 11:59 p.m. That's 3 pages minimum to the bottom. MLA, formatting required. Everything's checked for plagiarism, of course. The only thing you need to submit in your essay packet is your final draft. If you use any source materials, you need to include it on a bib. Otherwise, your bib will have the entry of the short story on it. So if you're not sure how to cite a short story, I highly suggest just Googling Purdue OWL. And that will tell you how to just Google, a short story citation, MLA, and that will tell you how to cite for MLA for a short story. I've given some examples here to kind of help you start thinking about what this essay might look like, whether you choose a character, a theme, or an approach. So if you're looking at characters, like I said, your job is to look at how that character conveys a certain, situation, set of beliefs or ideals. So looking at things like motivation and behavior to tell you what kind of person that character is. So in this story, it's really interesting because you have so many characters. I would suggest narrowing your focus to really, really discuss deeply 1 or 2 characters max. What you don't want to do is go through each set of characters and just say, first we meet this person, then we meet this person, then we meet this person, then we meet this person. That's just telling me what happens. It doesn't tell me the why. So if you wanted to concentrate on a character, you might concentrate on, for example, the murderer, or you might concentrate on the police commissioner, or you might concentrate on, the mother, or whoever it is. And I want you to discuss that character in depth, looking at what makes them have motivation. You can think about things like, is that character lying? How do you know they're lying? What do they have to gain from lying? Or do you think that character is telling the truth? Why do you think that? Again, what do they have to gain or not gain from telling the truth? So look deeply at that character, look at their motivations, and then think through literary aspects of characterization. So think about things like round or flat. Are they dynamic or are they static characters? Do they change? Do they not change? What does that signify for us as the reader? You also want to look at things like how that character conveys certain ideas. So what is the author trying to tell us through this character? Is he trying to tell us that as an unreliable narrator, we have no way of knowing who's telling the truth? Maybe that's just it. Maybe there is no such thing as truth, and that character is showing us that. Or it could be the opposite. Maybe it's that truth wins out every single time, or honesty wins out, or honor wins out. So there's a lot of different things you can say around these characters. Again, like I said, I don't want you to just sit there and tell me what each character does. That's just recounting the plot. That's not analysis. That's just recounting or summarizing. So think deeply about 1 or 2 characters and think about how you might analyze that character with a certain set of beliefs or ideals or messaging around that character. What is the author trying to tell us? Similarly, if you choose a theme, you should center your argument around maybe 1 or 2 themes max. So you're going to basically say the theme of the story is X, and here's how I know that, and here's the main ideas around that. So if you say, for example, the theme is truth versus perception, and that we can never know what truth really is. That's a theme. And then you'll go into each of your main ideas and you'll explain how maybe, this character shows that there is no such thing as truth. And this plot device tells me that perception really is all that matters. And then lastly, this symbol or this idea shows me that there is no such thing as truth. Or you could do the opposite and say that truth is relative or truth is real. You could talk about honor. You could talk about virtue. You could talk about the idea of love. What is love in this case? You could talk about tradition or rebellion, or both together. There's a lot of things you could kind of talk about in terms of theme. But like I said, I want you to choose one or two things max, because otherwise your argument can kind of go really broad. And I want you to think very narrow about this topic. And then approach is another one that's really important. So you could do a whole reading of this story with a feminist reading of the female character and her role in the story. You could do a whole reading of the story through a cultural lens. How does the feudal Japanese culture help shape meaning in this story? Or how does a psychological reading of the character, maybe you're going to argue that one of the characters has a certain, psychological issue, or I've had students do readings of the murderer as a schizophrenic. So really interesting things that you can do around the characters or whatever the cultural situation. You could also, again, do a new critical reading. Say you want to take a certain symbol or certain idea and really explore that. You can do that as well. So whatever you want to do, think about what you want to say about this piece of literature. You're not by any means limited to the examples I've given you here. They're just to get you thinking. I highly recommend you look at a couple of articles around the story to get some ideas about what some of the things are that people think about or talk about when they look at this story. That might help you. I'm not saying that you should plagiarize, and I'm not saying that you should just take those ideas and write them down as your own, but they might inspire you to think about a character or a theme or an approach in a certain way. Remember that you do still need to have all the parts of an argument. So that means you need to have an introduction with a thesis or claim around, whether it's the approach, the theme, or the character. At least 3 reasons. And then think about 1 to 3 opposing views with refutations as well. The essay is the entirety of the grade in this case. So there's no extra assignments. They're going to kind of pad that. So make sure you have a clean, well-organized argument with good support from the text. So you need to pull in specific quotes from the text that show your audience what you're talking about. So if you're telling me that love, or that, say, the idea of truth is relative, there's no such thing as truth, you need to pull in quotes from specific areas of the text that show me as the audience that truth is not real. If you're going to tell me that tradition is the most important thing in this culture, you need to pull in quotes which show me that as the audience. If you're going to say the same thing about, a character, that a character is a protagonist and they're the good guy, and that, that character is telling the truth, then you need to pull in quotes that prove that. Same thing on the different readings of the characters. If you're going to tell me that a cultural reading is very important, a historical reading of the samurai tradition, you need to pull in quotes which show me that. And again, the same thing goes if you choose to pull in outside research. Absolutely welcome to. Just remember that you should pull in evidence from those source materials to help show your audience what you're talking about. Again, include a bib with at least the short story on there, and then any other source material that you guys use. So like I said, choose what you want to talk about. Choose what was most interesting to you, whether that's a character, a theme, or an approach. And let me know if you have any questions as you start to write.